Did you be me?
No, it'll be fine. The Mrs. Piggle Wiggle Treasury. Mrs. Piggle Wiggle. And we are at a new chapter. Chapter 2, The Won't Pick Up Toys Cure. Mrs. Prentice took the crusty piece of a very old loaf of bread, spread some peanut butter on it, and took it around to the side of the house. Pretty soon, Hubert's window was raised about a foot and a hand and arm of raised about a foot. What? Pretty soon, Hubert's window was raised about a foot, and a hand and arm appeared. His mother stuck the bread on one of the tines of the rake and poked it up at the window. The hand groped out around for a while and then found the bread and jerked it off. The window banged shut. That night, when Hubert's father came home, his mother told him all about Mrs. Piggle Wiggle's treatment. Hubert's father said, "Mrs. Piggle Wiggle sounds all right." But none of this would have happened if Hubert's grandfather hadn't given him so many toys. When I was a boy, all I needed to have a good time was a little piece of string and a stick. Mrs. Prentice said, "Not that old string and stick routine again, John. Anyway, now that Hubert has the toys, the picture is changed." Mr. Prentice hid his face behind the evening paper and said, "Something smells delicious. Is it Irish stew? I hope." "Yes, dear," said Hubert's mother, worrying about how she was going to serve Irish stew to Hubert on a rake. She finally put a potato on one prong, a carrot on another, an onion on another, and a piece of meat on the last three.
Okay, wait. Let me just fix that.
The window was opened only about 3 inches, but the hand grabbed the food. After dinner, Hubert's father tied the hose to the rake and held it up while Hubert put his mouth to the window opening and tried to get a drink of water. It was not very successful, but he managed to get a few drops. Mrs. Prentice was worried. The next morning, she knocked on Hubert's door and said, "Hubert, what are you doing in there?" Hubert said, "I've got a bear pen made out of a bureau drawers, and my bed's the mother bear's house, and my train runs under my bed 13 times now." "Hubert, dear, don't you think you should try and come out soon?" asked his mother. Hubert said, "I don't want to come out. I like it in here. All my toys are out and I can play with them any old time I want to. This is fun." His mother went downstairs and called Mrs. Piggle Wiggle. Mrs. Piggle Wiggle said, "Oh, but he will want to come out. Wait and see." That afternoon, about 2 o'clock, there was music on the street and children's voices laughing and calling. And pretty soon, right past Hubert's house, marched Mrs. Piggle Wiggle and all the children. And right behind them came the circus parade. Hubert managed by putting one foot in a bureau drawer and the other in a freight car of his train to get up to the window and look out. He waved to Mrs. Piggle Wiggle and she called, "Hurry, hurry, Hubert. We are going to march all over town and then we are going to the circus." Hubert turned around quickly with an idea of getting to the door and joining the fun. But the freight car went scooting under the bed and the bureau drawer tipped over and hit him smartly on the shins. Hubert began to cry and to try and kick his way to the door. But everything he kicked seemed to hit back. He kicked a building and a big block fell on his toe. He kicked a little builder off his building and it fell over and clouded him on the back of the head. He kicked a book and it hit a lamp which fell and knocked a heavy wooden elephant off the bedpost onto Hubert's shoulder. He could hear the music of the circus parade growing fainter and fainter, and so he bawled louder and louder. Then he heard a tapping at his window. He crawled over and reached out. It was the rake with a note on it. He took the note and opened it. It said, The only way you can get out of that trap is to put everything away where it belongs. If you hurry, we will wait for you. Your friend, Mrs. Piggle. Hubert began by finding the little builder blocks. He took down an office building and put each piece in its right place. Then he put away the stone blocks, then the train tracks, the circus, the soldiers, the paints, the chemical set, the printing press, the books, the fire engines, the automobiles. He played little games, pretending that he was racing someone to see who could find the most parts of a game the quickest. He had to take off the bed clothes and shake them in order to find the soldiers and then the circus. And then he thought that as long as the bedclothes were off anyway, he might as well make his bed. It was so lumpy when he finished, he thought he had left some airplanes in it and took covers off again and shook them. He made the bed again, and this time it was neat and smooth. Hubert was proud. He was under the desk finding the last piece of the little builder when he heard the music again. He put the pieces in the box, put the box in the chest, and tore down the stairs and out the front door. There they came, Mrs. Piggle, all the children and the circus. Hubert ran out to meet them, and nobody said anything about the pan of orange paint stuck in his hair or the wood XYPGUN printed on his cheek in purple ink. Away they went down the street, Hubert carrying the flag and yelling the loudest. Chapter 3, The Answer Backer Cure. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Mrs. O'Toole put a peanut butter sandwich and a nice cool glass of milk on the kitchen table for her little girl. When she came home from school, pretty soon the front door slammed and it bounced Mary. Her red braids switching like little ponytails, her mother said, "How was school, darling?" Mary said as she gulped her milk and took a large bite of the sandwich. "Well, this afternoon, Miss Crabtree said, 'Mary O'Toole, will you stay in at recess and put the paint boxes away?' And I said," Mary took another gulp of the milk, "You're the teacher here, Miss Crabtree. Why don't you put away the paint boxes and let me go out and play?" Everybody in the whole room laughed, but mean old Miss Crabtree, and she sent me into the cloakroom. Mary took another large bite and looked up at her mother expectantly to see if she would appreciate how smart she was. However, her mother said, "That was a very rude thing for you to do, Mary, and I am ashamed of you. When you finish your sandwich and milk, you had better go up to your room and stay until dinner. You can concentrate on how rude you were to Miss Crabtree." Mary put her mouth down at the corner, squinted up her pretty brown eyes, and said, "Why should I?" She kept her mouth pulled down and blinked her eyes rapidly in a most disagreeable way. Mrs. O'Toole was dumbfounded. Never had her little Mary acted in such a horrid way before. She said quietly, "You should, because I tell you to. Now scat." Mary walked slowly out of the kitchen, switching her skirt and her braids and managing to look impudent, even from the back. When she reached the top of the stairs, she called down to her mother, "I'm going because I want to, but not because you tell me to," and dashed into her room and banged the door. That night at dinner, Mary was quite normal, but after dinner, her daddy said, "Scoot the dishes off the table. Wien, your mammy's tired." And his dear little Wien, instead of jumping up and doing what she was told, pulled her mouth down until she looked like a sad jack-o'-lantern, squinted up her eyes and said, "I'll do it because I want to, but not because you tell me to. Anyway, you eat here. Why don't you clear the table?" She blinked her eyes rapidly. Her father looked as though he might be going to give her a spanking, but then he noticed that it was time for the news. So instead, he went into his study, turned on the radio, and lit his pipe. Mary did clear off the table and she dried the dishes, but she kept blinking her eyes and muttering. The next morning, her mother said, "Please hurry with your breakfast, Mary. The children are waiting, and you'll make them late for school." Mary put her mouth down and began blinking. She said, "I'm the one that's eating this breakfast, madam." She pronounced it "matam." Mary's mother sighed and said, "If you only knew how unattractive you look when you talk like that, you would stop right now." Mary mumbled something into her mush, then grabbed her sweater and slammed out the front door. Mrs. O'Toole went to the telephone and called her friend, Mrs. Ragbag. She said, "Hello, Mrs. Ragbag. Have you noticed any change in Calliope lately?" Mrs. Ragbag said, "Well, no, I can't say I have, Mrs. O'Toole. She seems to be studying hard in school, and she eats and sleeps well. Have you noticed anything wrong with her? Mrs. O'Toole said, No, it is not Calliope I'm worried about. It is Mary. Yesterday afternoon, she came home from school and she seemed perfectly normal and she looked all right, but she told me how very impudent she had been in school. I punished her, of course. In fact, I sent her to her room to stay until dinner. But she was impudent. Where am I? She was impudent to me. She was rude to her father, too. I just cannot understand it. I thought perhaps all the children were acting this way. She pulls down her mouth, squints up her eyes, and blinks. She looks hideous. Mrs. Ragbag said, Oh, I'm sorry, Mrs. O'Toole, because Mary has always been such a dear little girl. I don't know what to suggest. Why don't you call Mrs. Keystop? You know what a problem her little Chucky is. She should have some ideas. Mrs. O'Toole said, Thank you very much, Mrs. Ragbag. I'll call Mrs. Keystop right now. So she called Mrs. Keystop, but she wasn't at home, and the maid, Nora, answered the phone. Nora said, Sure, and Mrs. Keystop ain't home, Mrs. O'Toole, but how is that dear little Mary? The one with the beautiful braids. Mrs. O'Toole said, Oh, Nora, that is just why I called. Mary has suddenly become so impudent. She answers back and she puts her mouth down and squints her eyes and blinks. She started yesterday and I'm so upset. I called to ask Mrs. Keystop if she has ever had similar trouble with Chucky. Nora said, Sure, and there ain't any trouble she hasn't had with that Chucky. He's so rude he talks back to himself. But I'm thinking you best call Mrs. Piggle Wiggle. That little woman has forgotten more about children than we'll ever know. She even taught Hubert Prentice to pick up his toys. Now there's a spoiled child. Mrs. O'Toole said, Oh, thank you so much, Nora. I should have thought of Mrs. Piggle Wiggle in the first place. I'll call her right now. Mrs. O'Toole called Miss Piggle Wiggle and said, Oh, Mrs. Piggle Wiggle, I am so worried about my little girl, Mary. Mrs. Piggle Wiggle said, I know Mary. She's such a beautiful red-haired little girl with lovely brown eyes. Mrs. O'Toole said, Well, she still has the hair anyway, but her eyes don't look pretty anymore. She squints them up, pulls down her mouth, and then she blinks. Mrs. Piggle Wiggle said, She answers back, and it is impudent, isn't she? Mrs. O'Toole said, Yes, she is, but how did you know? I do hope that she hasn't been rude to you. Mrs. Piggle Wiggle said, Oh no, Mary is always very polite to me, but I can apologize to answer back her symptoms. When was she first impudent? Yesterday afternoon, right after school, she was rude to dear Miss Crabtree, her teacher, and when I sent her to her room, she made this hideous face and said, I'll do it because I want to, not because you tell me to. Mrs. Piggle Wiggle, she walks in such a way that her braids twitch and even her back looks impudent. Mrs. Piggle Wiggle said, Don't worry so, Mrs. O'Toole. Some of the most charming children I know were once answer backers. Fortunately, Mary has only just begun, so she can be cured in no time at all. You drop by here after lunch, and I will give you Penelope Parrot to keep for a while. Mrs. Garrison has been using Penelope, but she has had her for a month now, and Gary should be cured by this time. Now, don't worry, Mrs. O'Toole. Penelope is a cure for even the most stubborn cases of backishness. Mrs. O'Toole hung up the phone and she felt much better. Right after lunch, she went down to Mrs. Piggle Wiggle and got Penelope. Penelope Parrot was a large, cross-looking green parrot who blinked rapidly. Mrs. Piggle Wiggle said as she handed the cage to Mrs. O'Toole, Fortunately for you, Penelope will only talk to children. During the walk home from Mrs. Piggle Wiggle's house, Penelope was quiet in a very cross, blink-eyed sort of way. And when Mrs. O'Toole hung her cage in the kitchen, she hunched down and put her forehead under her wing. But when Mary came in from school, Penelope woke up and began preening her feathers. Mary was delighted with Penelope. She said, Oh, Mother, I've always and always wanted a parrot. Do you think she can talk? Mrs. O'Toole said she hasn't said a word since I brought her home, but I was told that she speaks only to children. Mary said, Where did you get her, Mother? Is she for me? May I have her in my room for my very own? Her mother said, I'm keeping her for a friend of mine. But when you play in your room, you may hang her cage by the window. Her mother said, I'm keeping her for a friend of mine. Wait, I'll just say that. Mary brought her some milk and cookies over by Penelope's cage and was very surprised when Penelope blinked and said rudely, Give me a bite, pig. Mary broke off a piece of the cookie and poked it through the bars of the cage. The cage. Penelope snatched it and said, Thanks, pig. Mary turned to her mother. She's certainly not very polite, is she? Her mother said, Perhaps she has been around rude people. After all, she is only a parrot and repeats what she hears. Penelope blinked her eyes and said, Oh, yeah, oh, yeah, oh, yeah. Mrs. O'Toole looked a little shocked, but Mary laughed and said, May I bring the children in to see her, Mother, may I? Okay, that's where we stop now. So, that's almost like chapter 3. Chapter 3 is the answer backers. And yeah, so we'll finish the rest tomorrow. Good night. The story is called The Mrs. Piggle Wiggle Treasury. It's 3 Piggle Wiggle books in one. The first one I'm reading is Mrs. Piggle Wiggle. Then they have Mrs. Piggle Wiggle's Magic. Then they have Hello, Mrs. Piggle Wiggle. Have a good night.